Hey, Elias, thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah. Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. For my background. I am 36 years old. I am currently the director of international indirect sales at Tribe 29, which is a German software company. My background, by education, I'm an economist. I've never worked as such. Um, Worked a few years in strategy consulting, first employed, then was in a tech company here in Munich as well afterwards. Then went out on my own for a few years, did some freelance consulting, tried my hands at a startup, failed spectacularly at that. And then about 2 years ago, I ended up at the Tribe, so the company I work for today, Tribe 29. And here I try to run a sales team.
Yeah.
Uh,
And why the economics degree? Was that just math and business or?
well, so it's kind of the mathematical one of the economic sciences,
Yeah.
and I sort of was interested in that. Although when I kind of decided for that, I have always been interested in history and politics and kind of the social sciences. And especially the university where I studied, which is the University of Freiburg, has a very strong um, background in economic policy, in kind of the foundational works of liberal economic policy, liberal with a small L. Um, and That was more attractive to me than the mathematics of it. In the end, I ended going a very mathematical route. So I studied econometrics and these kind of things. But what originally attracted me to it was sort of the economic policy part of things.
And how does that, has that helped you in sales or has it hurt in sales or both?
Um, I think Nia. So
Neither.
if I could go back, so there's very few regrets in my life. I'm not much of a regretter, um, but if I could go back in time, I would probably study something differently,
Yeah.
independently from whether I would end up in sales or not. In the end, it's all sort of a path dependency. Who knows if I would have studied engineering or computer sciences, where I might have ended up. Um, I would say having a mind for numbers doesn't hurt in sales. That's definitely true. Although I would have had this in any field that I studied, I guess. Um, so where it helped me is, I think, initially in my career when I worked in strategy consulting. I think there it was very helpful, and I would definitely say that my work in strategy consulting is helping me every day in sales. So not through the direct route, but indirectly, I'm sure it hasn't hurt.
Yeah. And why leadership? What motivated you to get into sales leadership?
Well, so there's this saying in by a German poet in one of his works who says, he half dragged her down and half she fell into his arms. In that case, it's a bit of that. So obviously, I've never been shy in taking over responsibility, and if you do that often enough, somebody will take
Gives
you
it
up
to
on
you.
that
Yeah.
and will give this to you. So maybe to just paint a picture of how this came to be is when I started at Tribe 29, the company was already hugely successful. So it's a very successful, fast-growing company. And I know how you sometimes, I think you say it's not the product. Well, it is the product. It's a super successful product that almost sells itself, which
Who
is
needs
great as a
sales?
salesperson. Well, and but to be honest, in the early days at the Tribe, it was almost like
Sales.
that. That
Yeah.
it's what was called sales then, and this is not kind of to be negative about anybody, was more of a sort of glorified order intake,
Yeah.
where customers would come sort of pen in one hand, money in the other, and would say, "Please let me sign. I want to buy." Which is great. And if you can grow a company based on that, that's pretty nice. Um, but we want to, and if you're already growing with that, imagine what you could do if you
With
actually
sales.
start selling.
Yeah.
And this is sort of was and still is my task at the tribe, to together with my counterpart who takes care of the German speaking regions of the DACH region, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, which is kind of our home market, to actually do this, to actively start selling this, to take growth from this to this,
Yeah.
and kind of go into unlock the true potential of the company, which we're all convinced of.
So is it a classic kind of bottom up product led sale where people can download either a free or an inexpensive one and then you upsell or?
Yeah, so I think if that is okay for you, I'd give a little bit of context about the
Yeah,
product,
please.
because it helps to understand the whole thing, not to do any kind of advertising. But so what Tribe 29 produces is a software called CheckMK, which is an IT infrastructure and application monitoring solution.
Yeah.
So this is typically used by your IT operations team, your IT admin team. And it started as a completely open source
Okay.
product,
Yeah.
which you could download, install, modify as you saw fit. And at some point, it added an enterprise version of that, which you can't just download and install and run as you see fit, but you need to buy it. Um, but our main customer acquisition channel to this day is the free open source version, which companies sometimes have been using at scale for years. And then they say, okay, the enterprise version has these three features that we are missing, or it's better scalable and has some enterprise features we'd like to upgrade. And this is our typical or has always been our typical customer acquisition channel. um, and kind of to answer your original question, so it is and has always been a very much a bottom up. All our marketing is aimed at IT ops teams, at
Yeah.
system administrators. We have super detailed blog articles on how to do network monitoring or storage monitoring or whatnot. Um, we are starting to complement that with a more sort of top down, not CIO level. For that, I think just in terms of investment, a tool like ours is totally irrelevant. But kind of the IT manager, the head of infrastructure, these kind of people, we're starting to complement that, because these are just very different conversations to be had, but also unlock much more potential. Instead of, okay, the storage team now is using CheckMK, but the network team and the server team and the database team, they're all using something different. If you come in from the top, then you might actually have the chance of this being adopted throughout the infrastructure. So, but this is early days of
Yeah.
this approach. We're
Well,
feeling our way in.
yeah, because a lot of companies have taken that approach and it works really well. But
Yeah, it
it,
does.
yeah. But you're into a group that isn't very communicative. They're kind of
There I would honestly disagree,
really?
because if you see the level of activity that we have in the open source community,
Yeah.
we have our community, we have a forum, we have we have thousands of active users every month that communicate about our product. I think this question of like IT ops or sysadmins not being communicative comes from they oftentimes don't like
Talking
to
to
communicate with
salespeople.
salespeople,
People. That's what I meant.
especially
Yes,
with salespeople.
they party and everything, but not with
Yeah,
us.
yeah, and especially, I mean, you get called on, like, if you try to bullshit somebody. Am I allowed to say this?
Yes.
No. So if you try to kind of be vague, that just doesn't fly. So you really need to know your stuff. You need to know your product. You need to be able to communicate at eye level. And then you can get a great conversation going. You get detailed feedback about your product, about what works, what doesn't work, why they like it. It's just a matter of being able to communicate there.
So, as the leader, what's the hardest part of your job then?
I mean, there's several, I would say. So there's several hard parts, and depending on the day, one of them will
I'm
be the
asking.
hardest.
Yeah.
So I mean, in general, I'm not that long into my career as a manager, a leader. So many of these things that come with that job do not yet come natural to me. So I still have the tendency to do stuff on my own instead of to delegate and coach. This is just, I think, because I've been an operator all my life, and now I need to kind of coach operators, which is a very different thing. Um, this is definitely one thing, and this is just something that comes with learning and experience and growing into this role. In terms of kind of sales at Tribe 29, what I find quite difficult sometimes, if your company is already very successful and you're really growing at a quite high rate, inspiring this, guys, growing, I'm just making a random number to not tell our competitors too much, but if we're already growing at 40% per year, I'm sure we could grow 80% a year if we would do these three things.
Yep.
And then kind of getting to this point of why, but 40% is already great. So kind of having this perspective of, yes, it's great, we're successful, we're making money, awesome, but we could be even more awesome if we would do a few things, and getting this same sense of urgency is I think something that has been a, I wouldn't say a struggle, but is something that is just one of the big things we're working on.
So, so what I heard, and you can correct me, is you're going from kind of the open source to enterprise quality products that require approvals where open source didn't require any approval.
That's part of it, yes. I mean, we're
Yeah.
also building. So I mean, the open source is still there, and
Yep.
there's enterprises that use it at a really, really big scale, the open source product, and they tinker with it on their own. That's perfectly fine. But yes, we're getting more and more into kind of complex enterprise deals where, it's not just the customer wants to buy our product, but the customer wants to buy our product and integrate it into their entire ITSM, IT service management, sorry, environment. And how is that solved? What is our role to play as the software vendor? We're not a system integrator. We don't want to do system integration.
Right.
So, we need to partner up with somebody who does this. Who do we partner up with? How do we enable them? How do they learn about our, and so on. So there's a whole new set of challenges that comes from playing this enterprise game that also goes beyond just, well, legal is more effort and procurement is more effort.
Right.
Actually, the delivery of what we do
Is
changes completely.
and has that required hiring a different type of sales rep or evolving the existing team or both?
Both, and we are, kind of shifting our hiring more towards people that can. I mean, this is an ongoing process,
Yeah.
that can manage these projects, because right now, these projects take a very, very high load on, people like me, on my German counterpart, because we're very, very involved in these kind of large enterprise deals, which on the one hand is great because I really do enjoy that. And this is actually where my strategy consulting background helps. I mentioned this earlier, because I mean, one thing you do as a strategy consultant who, where the company charges, 2,000-3,000 euros a day for your work, you typically work in enterprise environments with,
Yeah.
enterprise decision makers. So I personally understand quite well how these organizations work and how you need to communicate value, what is, translate sort of the technical thing into what is actually the business objective that you're trying to reach with
Yeah.
that. So I enjoy that immensely, but it takes a huge toll on my time. And over
Right.
time, I need to kind of have other people on my team who can take this and, be more selective about, where they involve me if they need me, rather than me carrying most of the load on some of these deals.
So it sounds like a hard part of it would be how do you prioritize these deals based off of when they can close? Because you can't use a ton of Q1 time on a Q4 deal and miss Q1.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is, I think, where we're very European in a sense that if it's Q1 or Q2, it does not matter as much as it would like in an American sales organization, I think. And so we'd rather win a deal 2 months later, but have it kind of in all its beauty than trying to quickly close it and then hoping on an expansion. Um, so that's one aspect of it.
But time's relative, right? You got okay. It needs to be a 2021 deal, not a 2025 deal, right?
Yes. So I think let's put it this way. We're not as driven by quarters as
Yeah.
I think some sales organizations are. But yes, I mean it would hurt if like a large enterprise deal falls from 2020 to 21 or from 21 to 22. So yes, obviously we have our calendar in mind, and I think right now we're in the situation where, kind of one or two of these big deals closing take a good year to a great year. But right now, with the way our goals are structured and so on, we're not yet at that point where we can't have a good year if we're not closing, these deals on time. Because we have just enough of sort of the mid-market with shorter sales cycles that just keeps on going. But I mean, next year will be different. Next year we will have to get significant pieces of what we need to win from these kind of enterprise deals, because you can't win, our growth ambition with just sort of the smaller and mid-market business. It's just
So then how do you structure your team? Do you have enterprise reps, or do you segment it based off of deal size, geography?
so right now it is. So when I started, it was everybody does everything.
Yep.
End to end, full from, picking up the phone on an inbound call or, a first request to all the way to negotiation and closing of the deal. And we are in the middle of sort of breaking this apart. The first thing we did, we split it by region. So we have a DACH team for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and we have a rest of world team.
Yeah.
Then now what we're doing is we're adding sort of functions, which is, you have a BDR who does a lot of the lead qualification and these kind of things. And then we have sort of the AEs who do the bulk of the, specifying the deal, negotiating, involving technical pre-sales and so on. And then the next logical step, and this is what we're doing right now, is actually splitting the pipeline into sort of regular deals and what we call big deals, which is then translates roughly into enterprise deals. And then over time, this will be a separate team. Right now, there's a separate process, and it might be some of the same people with more air support from people like me. But over time, we will have enterprise sales reps that focus exclusively on these big deals.
And what's hard about that? Has it been hiring, training? Because it sounds like there's a lot of skill in your head that needs to be transferred.
So the challenge has shifted over time. So
Yeah.
when I started, there were a few sales reps that had been kind of hired a few months or half a year prior to when I started. So this was about 3 years back, and it took a really, really long time to onboard them.
Yeah.
Because obviously there were few people who could show them the ropes, nothing was documented, and so on. And we did a lot of work in this area. So now it doesn't take a year for a person to become productive, but maybe, within 4 to 6 weeks, they can start doing the first things. And after, 3 months, we can consider them fully onboarded and they know the product, they know the processes, they can do maybe, except for some edge cases, everything. So the kind of training and onboarding has become less of a challenge because we just have more in place, and better processes, better documentation and everything. I already mentioned sort of the mindset thing of, hey, 40% is great, 80% is better. Um, so this is something that we are continuously working on, kind of the hunger part of things, um, and I think now it is what you mentioned earlier. Being able to manage your pipeline in a way to know, okay, where do I apply which amount of energy and devote my time and resources to, especially even if you look beyond just the sales team. We have the pre-sales, the technical pre-sales engineers, who are also in high demand. And obviously, if you're selling to, just making up a random name, let's say Vodafone, large international telco group, then they're not fine with just 2 demos and 1 Q&A session. They might want proof of concept support for
Yeah.
20 days.
Yeah.
Now, find a consultant for 20 days. And this is, so this trickles down into the entire organization, the new requirements from these large deals.
Yeah. And that growth, doesn't the comp plan motivate them to want to grow faster, or is it?
So this was actually something that my Richard, my counterpart for the DACH region, I actually really introduced, is such a thing as a compensation plan, because before that it was just, there was a variable component, but it was basically, I wouldn't say guaranteed, but
Yeah.
there was no significant upside from what we, what you would get if the performance was spectacular. And we see that this does have an effect, because last year was a tough year for everybody,
Right.
but we actually beat our targets. So we came out above budget in the Corona year, which I think to some extent was also that we got better at kind of maximizing deal sizes. We get better at upselling. We get better at closing just as well. But it's still early days. We're doing maybe not baby steps anymore, but toddler steps on this journey, and we're far from where we want to be.
And how technical do the salespeople have to be?
So this is actually quite interesting. We have a range. We have like one colleague, she's super successful, she closes deals where you just scratch your head and said, how did you do this? Um, and she's not technical at all. She does it all through relationship and building rapport and knowing when to involve and she just involves the pre-sales engineers more. But she hits her quota year in, year out, super successful, great friends with many of our most important customers. So yeah. On the other end of the spectrum, you have people that are super technical and that can, show the product in all its beauty. They can script stuff and everything in between. I think if we would average it out, I think it would be good to be quite technical. Again, the communication aspect being to speak the language of your target group. But it's not it works if you have great skills somewhere else. It also works without that. But I think if you would want to say, okay, if you want to maximize the probability of success, I think having a solid technical understanding and a good product understanding is important.
Yeah. And you came recommended by your people. Why do you think they did that?
Well, I was actually quite flattered by that, and I was really, made my day that day. So I think, it's a couple of things. I try to be a nice guy, even if being a manager sometimes involves taking unpopular decisions or being tough on in some things. But I'm sure the book Radical Candor
Yep.
by Kim Scott. This is kind of an approach I try to follow. I'm not saying that I manage to do this every day, but it's something that I strive for. So, I care deeply about my entire team, about everybody I work with, but I still, it's my job to also challenge them, and being um, asking tough questions and at some point also taking unpopular decisions. Um, so I think that is one aspect of it. I think I also, and I this is also feedback I'm getting, I'm just inventing this, is, I never ask anything that I'm not willing to do myself. So I used to be in the army back in the days before I studied and so on. And there was always, yes, your superior officer or whatever, he can ask you to do 100 push-ups, but then he has to do them himself as well. Um, and this is kind of my approach. If I ask somebody, and if I ask somebody to kind of go the extra mile, you bet you that I will go an extra mile and probably even a little bit more to do this. And I
Yeah.
think this is something that a team appreciates. That um, you know, if there's some kind of manual busy work to be done, I'll carry my share of that. Even if I could say, hey, this is not my role, and you figure it out.
Yeah.
Um, so might sometimes take an extra toll on my time, but I think a team appreciates if you say, hey, I'm not asking anything that I wouldn't be willing to do. And if I tell you to call that customer who just yelled at you, call him back, I'll call him back if you want me to. And I think this is a very important aspect of it.
And how about as far as either shielding them from kind of the internal distractions, meetings, compliances,
Well,
paperwork?
we're a small company, so we
That's right.
have
Yeah.
relatively little of
Yeah.
that. I mean, it's natural that it becomes more and more. It's a All right, before I explain this, we're very much a kind of tech-driven, developer-driven company. So I don't know if you know this article, Manager Schedule versus Maker Schedule,
Yep.
by Paul Graham, I think it was. And what it says that makers need, you know, as large uninterrupted blocks of time as
Yes.
possible. So what we try to do, and throughout the company, we try to be mindful of that. Our developers, we try to not put any meetings in the middle of the day. It's either early in the day or at the end of the day. Um, and the same with our sales teams. We try to do all meetings kind of in the morning before the craziness starts, or really late in the afternoon when you don't reach customer anymore anyway, and not try to kind of pepper the day with meetings, and so that you have
Right.
constant context switching. And I recently looked at one of my salespeople's calendars, and I counted the internal meetings that he had, and it was like 4 in 1 week. And I said, hey, that is not too bad. That's like a morning for me. But everything, obviously you have customer calls and meetings and these kind of things, but that's what they're
Figure.
supposed to do,
Right.
you know. So we try to, but it's a balance to be struck, because you want to involve people, and people want to be involved in, especially if we're doing so much new stuff, overhauling processes, coming up with new stuff. People want to be involved, but to be involved, there's a certain amount of time and meetings that you need to kind of be part of in order to be involved. And you need to strike a balance between the two. You can't just tell them, hey, this is what we've come up with, deal with it, all the time. But on the other hand, if you involve everybody in every decision, you never get anything done.
Get
And
nothing
everybody's
done.
complaining about, hey, I have 37 internal meetings this week. When do you want me to call my customers? So there's a balance to be found there.
Yeah. And how do you find that balance for yourself? Because you certainly could be pulled into eight
I
hours a
am.
day.
I am. So um, I am being pulled into way too much stuff. And I'm not spending enough time with customers, unfortunately. I actually had this conversation one morning with a customer, where I said, and he was apologizing for, sorry to pulling you in again, because I just talked to him yesterday. I said, hey, you can call me at any time. I'm glad to skip out on an internal meeting for a customer call. It's always, if you're in sales, it's the perfect excuse.
It is.
Hey guys, I have to talk to a customer. I can't do this meeting. Um, but no, just in all seriousness, I mean, right now, a lot of goes through kind of personal extra effort and extra miles being gone at unchristly hours. I mean, especially if you're in international sales, I
Right.
talk with New Zealand and I talk with the US, and so that sometimes makes for crazy hours. Although I also take just afternoons off and spend time with my family because that's when my kids are home from school and so on. So I take a longer break there, and I don't mind sitting down in the evening at 9 or 10 in the evening to have a call with New Zealand or Texas or wherever. Um, so that works out quite well.
Cool. Hey, Elias, I really appreciate your time today. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
So if you want to connect with me, I think LinkedIn is the best place to go. You can find me there. I try to be active there. If you want to learn about Tribe 29 as a company, about Checkup Care as a product, LinkedIn is a good place to start. But also just visit our website, visit one of our webinars if people are interested in that kind of thing. We're also hiring, so
Oh, yeah.
we're looking for great colleagues in all departments. And maybe if you permit me, we will expand to the US. So we will be hiring a US team based somewhere on the East Coast. So if you're really considering a career change in the US, then give me a call or send me a message on LinkedIn.